Welcome. This is Freelancing 101, episode 6. This episode is How to Freelance as a Media Planner. My name is Connor Welch. I'm your host, and I'm also a full time Meta and Google ad freelancer. I make companies more profitable by advertising on Facebook, Instagram, Google, YouTube, TikTok, and more. I'm joined with Jill Parkinson. She is a full time media planner freelancer, and I'll have her explain exactly what that is because we're going to kind of both learn together, you as a listener and me as the host. But this episode's objective is to explain the what, why, and how to freelance as a media planner. So, Jill, before we dive into what a media planner is and what you do, I want to ask this intro question because I think as a freelancer, I've experienced that it's kind of a new realm. It's hard to uh, know a lot of other freelancers or even possibly know where to start. And so I want to ask this question is if you could give one piece of advice to somebody that's thinking about freelancing, maybe even specifically as a media planner, but maybe just a freelancer in general, what would that piece of advice be?
That piece of advice would be get one client, typically on Upwork. Um, Stats show that it's easier to get a client from a referral. So, like someone you used to work for and get a client that way. But I know Mr. Beast has this rule that's like people reach out to him about YouTube, and he says, once you've made 100 videos and uploaded them, then we'll talk. And I feel
Mm.
like my one piece of advice is make an Upwork profile or make a LinkedIn profile, make a website, whatever. Like put yourself out there, get one client, and then maybe you realize you hate freelancing, maybe you realize you love freelancing. So my piece of advice is just get one and then go from there.
So, in a way, kind of just start. Like it's almost, I think a lot of people feel like, and I think it's okay to plan and do your research, but for me, a lot of times freelancing felt like jumping off a cliff into water. You know, that
Yeah.
initial jump is really scary. And a lot of times, if you overthink it, you'll never actually try it. So that's such a good piece of advice. And that's actually a piece of advice I had to follow myself, where I just kind of had to not necessarily fake it till I made it, but start and get that first client and learn from that first client, probably the hard way in a lot of ways. But yeah, I love that. Okay, well, Jill, so what do you do as a media planner, and why did you go the freelance route?
Yeah. So as a media planner, I basically run all the ads you don't, if you will. So
Right, right.
nothing really search, nothing really social. So for example, billboard ads, I
Mm,
can buy those. Let's say you go to Forbes.com and there's some kind of like whole takeover on their website from one
mm,
specific brand. Uh, or podcast ads are really big right now, newsletter ads. Um, so I basically do two buckets of media planning. One is what a lot of people call like direct media planning. So that's where I'm reaching out to someone, I'm negotiating the price.
mm,
Um, and it's kind of old school. Like if you think newspaper, if you think magazine, that was all done, one person reaching out to another saying, hey, you're Nike, put your ad in our running shoe magazine, and I would negotiate something like that. So it's not, I don't really do any print anymore. I've done a little bit of it, but basically any ad you could buy on the internet or even out of home, like billboard, if you would
mm,
call it,
mm-hmm,
I can do that kind of thing. And then the other bucket is programmatic. So there's no negotiation like person to person. There's a couple different apps that are programmatic, if you will. I mean, technically, search and social are programmatic, but if
mm-hmm.
you've heard of Google Display and Video or the Trade Desk or um, Stack Adapt, Choosel, any of those types of platforms, typically that's more like a pre-roll video you'd see before, watching a video on someone's website, or the banner ads that you see on the side of a website, or even the really popular, like you go look at this specific bag, and then you get 1,000 ads for it over the coming days. Like a lot of
Mm,
those are Google ads, but some of them are programmatic. So
interesting.
yeah,
The more direct route, can you give examples, maybe specifically digital or even specific websites that do that? I didn't know I guess I've kind of done that with KSL here in Utah slash Nevada. KSL is kind of big and you have to go direct to them to advertise. Would that be considered
exactly.
the sim? Okay, gotcha.
Exactly. So a lot of times it's a really specific industry. So for example, I had a client that was in the CPG space and they were selling like greens, if you will. And so they wanted to get on websites that talk specifically about food, like organic
Hmm.
food or food of the future. So that could mean like Forbes having a section on food and they want to take over the whole site and like sponsor it and sponsor every podcast they have for a whole month. So it's that kind of thing, and they're pricey buys.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you can't pause them typically, right? Like you can pause a Google ad. So
Right.
it takes kind of an expert to come in and be like, okay, this is a good buy, or this is something you should skip, because a lot of times these companies are being pitched this awesome opportunity to be an exclusive newsletter sponsor. And then when you really dive into it, it's not a good, you're not going to get like a return on your investment for some of those. So,
Oh, absolutely. This also applies pretty much, I would argue, in any digital advertising realm. Get yourself an expert that actually knows, that can kind of like protect you against the advertiser, if that's a good way to put it. Google and Meta are very similar. They will give you so much advice and they act like they're on your team and they act like they want the absolute best for you. But their agenda is to make more money. Same with all those direct websites or newsletters you're speaking of. They really just want the revenue. So to hire somebody like Jill is incredibly important to protect yourself and to align with good strategy. Absolutely.
yeah,
Well,
I
cool.
just, I feel like I've made a couple memes about this myself, but the CEO will get pitched like, you should do this big trade show booth sponsorship and we'll put your logo up in the sky in drones. And it's like, whoa, let's take a step back. What does
Yeah.
this actually get us? So
Yeah.
yeah.
That does sound kind of
um
cool, though. This guy, the name in
right, it's like,
some
ooh, it's
drones.
kind of one of those flashy buys.
Yes. Yes. Well, cool. So, what skills did you need? Possibly, like hard skills, like actually like knowing how to buy, how to like read cost per click and cost per acquisition and stuff like that. But also like soft skills did you need to freelance as a media planner?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is like an analytics
Mm-hmm.
um, background. That would be the hard skill. So I've always liked Excel. I've always liked numbers. I've always liked math. And
Mm-hmm.
um, with the clients that I take on, I'm not running, I'm not making their creatives.
Mm-hmm.
So I can advise them, right? Like, oh, this ad is red. Maybe you should make it blue, and this is why. Or I'll be like, this ad is static, like it doesn't move at all. Maybe you should make a video ad. I can advise in that way. But mostly I'm crunching numbers. So I'm looking at, hey, this, you want to run the ad to the zip code? Well, this is the like household index or income here, and this is how they index for uh, organic shoes. Like numbers like
Mm-hmm.
that. That's definitely the hard skill side of it. As far as soft skills, I feel like this could be applied to any freelance or
Mm-hmm.
really any work environment. You are you have to know how to articulate like what you're selling. So, if someone comes to me and they're really excited because the New York Times wants to put their ad on the front page or on like the home page, I have to articulate like why this isn't a good buy. And that does take some hard skills, right? I have to like run the numbers on it, but I think
Mm-hmm.
you need to be able to say, hey, this isn't a good idea and this is why, or like this is a great idea and this is why. I also think you need to be able to talk yourself up in the big moments that happen. So I bought a newsletter ad a couple months ago for a client that ended up getting some business for them that was like millions of dollars. And
Right.
I was like, okay, like that, it's not like you have to pay me more or anything, but like let's repeat the buy. Let me
Mm-hmm.
explain like why we might be able to like repeat those results. So I think the soft skill is just communication. So
Absolutely. How do you find that client to begin with? How do you get in front of that client? And we'll talk more on the how, but I think as a soft skill, that was one of the ones that I had to learn quickly, but I'm still learning as how to market myself and stand out and find people that could like really use my service. And I kind of do think that's like a soft skill. It's interesting because you and I are both advertisers, right? So we're advertising some company's product. I had to learn and still am learning how to sell myself, how to sell my services and things like
yes,
that. And I really want to pick your brain on how you've accomplished that. We can kind of continue through the what questions, but I think as a freelancer, there's all these hard skills like analytics, like for me, like knowing how to set up campaigns and yeah, analyze them and strategize and things like that. But you'll find quickly that corporations actually do a lot of work in the background that you don't know. One of them is they market themselves and find you work. When you go to freelancing, you've got to take that on. So,
that's
sorry,
true.
total tangent, but I was just interested.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I remember like someone will hire me, at whatever level they are, VP, let's say, and then
Mm-hmm.
suddenly you find yourself presenting what you did to someone higher than that, and they're like, "Who are you?
Yeah, it's
What
like,
are
oh,
we
here we go
doing
again.
here?" Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So even I think beyond like the pitch and getting the client, you need to prove, hey, this is what I do, and this is what I've done, and so this is what we're doing going forward.
Absolutely. Well, I've got a couple more what questions. One of them is what training was required or possibly recommended for media planning? Like maybe even before you try to get that first client. Like, what do you need to know?
Yeah, so I have a bachelor's degree in marketing from Utah State University, go Aggies.
Hmm. Okay.
And I did several different internships, just wide range. Like I did an internship for Amazon in college. I did an internship for Science Bank. Like I was kind of all over the place in what I even wanted to do. But for me, I ended up doing an ad agency media planner role for about a year before I started freelancing, a little over a year. And I feel like that is a great introduction to the process and the abbreviations, if you will, in media planning. So, like
Hmm.
CPM, you might learn that in a class, but once you have to calculate CPM over and over and over, then you're
Hmm.
going to get more experience. So, I don't think it's unreasonable for someone to go straight from college or straight from high school right into freelancing. But
Hmm.
for me, I ended up doing a corporate full time job, if you will, to learn some of those skills and learn that like IO stands for insertion order and RFP stands for request for proposal, like that kind of thing. I'm sure
Hmm.
I could have learned as a freelancer, but for me, uh, I started learning that stuff at like an ad agency and a corporate full time job. But I found that once I was on the job, I would just Google like media planner training, and I
Hmm.
would take Google's programmatic uh, certification course, and I would take Stack It App's programmatic certification course. And I started following people on Twitter who, did the same thing that I did. Or I remember one year, I think it was the first year I had been freelancing, like right before COVID hit, if you will. And I started tweeting about the Super Bowl. No, actually, this
Hmm.
was Super Bowl 2021. Um, I started tweeting like, "Hey, this is the actual return on like a Super Bowl ad. This is how buying TV ads even works if you wanted to. And this is
Mm-hmm.
like the minimums type of thing. And so I feel like just surrounding yourself with internet people who are doing the same thing as you is a great way to learn.
I
And so
love it.
the point of that Super Bowl tweet is I started following all these other media planners from that. They started following me, and you can kind of keep conversations going that way.
Oh, I love it. So I'm assuming the cost to get in or the preliminary equipment that you need are probably like a good computer, good internet. And is there anything else like
Yeah.
for a media planner?
I would say I personally am fine with Google Sheets. Here and there,
Mm,
you might have to get my like Excel on your desktop and actually pay for it.
right.
Sometimes they're just like more technical spreadsheets that people will send to you. And with programmatic specifically, you'll need like the actual programmatic software. So, like with
Mm,
you running Meta and Google Ads, they don't charge you for the software. Like they don't charge you to log into Meta Ads, right?
right, right.
With programmatic, sometimes there's a cost affiliated with just having access to run the ads. Like they're going to charge you for the software. So that's really the only thing, but that is a cost that should be passed along to your client. Or a lot of times, like clients will come to me specifically and they'll say, hey, we're already using Criteo, or like we're already using some specific platform.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not something I would be paying for.
Gotcha. They would just add you to that software program.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so now that you've made it as a freelancer and as a media planner freelancer, what are some of your current goals in your career?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a little before the mics turned on, if
Mm-hmm.
you will. But I'm getting induced Monday with my first child, so
Mm-hmm.
my
Congrats.
goals have shifted a little. But in general, my goal's always been to net 100K every year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Mm-hmm.
after paying for any software subscriptions I have, paying for my laptop, paying for my Wi-Fi, paying for my phone, paying for some travel, like that kind of stuff. Um, and that, I guess, in my mind, when I graduated college, I just wanted to hit six figures, right? That's like the
Right.
elusive number. And my first ad agency job out of college paid 50K. So I was like, wow, if I could just double my salary essentially, I mean, even more so than that, because I'm like netting 100K, like that kind of became the
Mm-hmm.
goal. But then over the years, I've been freelancing a little over 4 years. I started having some goals. I still have that goal. I still hit it, which
Mm-hmm.
is nice. But
Congrats. That's
thank
fantastic.
you. Now it's become like four clients at a time max, and it's become
Mm. Higher
um,
quality, less volume, potentially.
yeah, like I've been a lot more picky with my clients. That's not necessarily a goal, but I did have a goal at one time to get like all clients in the private aviation space.
Mm.
And then I decided to kind of transition away from that. And anyway, I feel like my goals as far as which clients I take on kind of change, but my biggest goal is really just net 100K and not have to be tied to my computer all day.
Right.
And that's really the beauty of freelancing for me. Like you're gonna have some long nights where this proposal is taking you way longer than you thought,
Mm-hmm.
or someone didn't get back to you in time and now you have to do this thing early in the morning, right? But for the most part, like if I want to go to Target right now, I can go to Target. If I want to go, like I live in Vegas, if a friend's in town and we want to go get massages and get lunch, like I can do that. And I feel like that's a goal, if you will, just to have the flexibility.
Okay, so that flexibility of not being tied to your desk at a specific, typically 9 to 5 range, how amazing is that going to be when you're uh, a mom?
Yeah, I'm very excited about that. And my husband is
Yeah.
self-employed as well. He does e-commerce. So it's just
Oh,
like
there we go.
we're on a daycare wait list. Like we don't know what we'll need in terms of
Hmm.
childcare, but I just know that that's kind of what fueled freelancing for me. Is like I just hate the idea of being online 9 to 5, especially in my own
Hmm.
house.
Or in person at a corporation in like a little cubicle. That, oh, it
Yeah,
sounds terrible. And what's
yeah,
interesting is I've interviewed and also talked with a lot of individuals that they are moms themselves and they were almost forced into freelance work because even companies now that are offering hybrid, uh, it still did not work with their schedule. And it's unfortunate because I think that company is missing out because these individuals I were talking to are, they have incredible experience, their performance is incredibly high. They just needed that even more flexibility than maybe even remote 9 to 5. And
yeah,
I, yeah, that's what gets me so excited about freelance work is you no longer have to just trade a chunk of your day for pay. It's more, hey, here's what I can get you. This is a direct, here's my performance. You pay me for these services, very similar to hiring a mechanic to do something. It's just really exciting. This
yeah.
actually leads perfectly into the why section. And I really only have one question, but why do you specifically do media planning and why did you choose the freelance style? And I think you've already hit mostly on this, but anything else, the pros and cons?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I wish I had really a deep response for like the why of media planning.
Hmm.
When I graduated college, I knew I didn't want to live in Logan anymore. I wanted to move to Salt Lake. Logan's great. I'm like, okay, I've done this, and it's a great college town. I mean, they have a Costco now. They didn't have that when I was there,
Wow.
but yeah, they're moving up. So uh, I just started applying for anything in Salt Lake and mostly ad agencies because I knew that would be a spot to learn like billing and creative and media and so
Hmm.
I just honestly I took the first offer that I liked the PTO and the salary for. And I remember my first day, they were like, "What department are you in?" And I'm like, "Marketing." I couldn't even tell you, you know. I'm like, I know what the job description says, but it's not anything I've necessarily done before. So that's kind of my why of media planning. It's not a great why, like it's not
Hmm.
super intentional. But I think that's how most people head into their first jobs anyway. It's just kind of what they got first.
Yeah.
um, but why I chose like the freelance lifestyle. Um, so at that ad agency job, I loved the client that I was working on. I was mostly working on one client. I liked, I liked going into the office. I liked everything about that. My husband had been working for an e-commerce company and running his own e-commerce business. And he was like, "Hey, I think I'm at a point where I can quit and make the same amount of money.
Hmm.
I think I'm going to quit like in the next month or two." And this was right before the summer. So I was like, "Oh my goodness, what if we just like went to Europe, you know, and we just worked remote? Like I've built this rapport with like my boss and at this company. Let's do it." And it was 2019, so different times.
Yes.
And I asked if I could go remote for a month. Like I'd actually already booked the tickets, like the flights, and I said like, "Hey, can I go work remote? Like this is my slowest season, if you will. I've already
Hmm.
done like all these really big projects, and the client's super happy with our work. I'm gonna do this." And ultimately, they just could not like. I don't know if it was permission from corporate because it was an agency owned by an agency owned by an agency, whatever.
Oh yeah. Oh
Um,
yeah.
but I actually chose the freelance lifestyle because they wouldn't give me the time off. So I just quit. Not the
Hmm.
time off, but the time to work remote. So that's actually how I chose the freelance lifestyle. I just quit. And then it was like, well, I guess I have to get a client because there weren't a lot of companies hiring remote at the time. It was 2019.
Hmm.
So anyway,
Totally.
ended up in
Yeah.
Europe for
You.
4 months though after that. And that was awesome.
Oh, absolutely. You, going back to that analogy of jumping off that cliff into the water, you absolutely just jumped off, and you made it work, and it's fantastic, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I remember like the night before I was going to go in and, tell my boss the situation and then I quit, just sitting there with my husband, like, is this the dumbest thing I've ever done? Like, what are we doing? We didn't have like a mortgage or kids or even a dog. Like, we still have a dog, but like, we just didn't have any of these like big, uh, I don't know, financial responsibilities, if you will. And I
For
was like,
sure.
okay,
Yeah.
let's just do it. Like, what the worst thing that happens is I don't have any income for a minute and we live on less. So,
Yeah. Yeah. But I also think you forced your own hand to really push yourself to make it work. Like you did that first advice you that you mentioned. It's you went and found your first client. That's like how you
right,
need to start. Go find a client. Okay, so
right.
the last little bit of this conversation is I really want to focus in on the how how Jill got it to work, how you got it to work, specifically so that a listener that's listening can possibly emulate what you've done and make it work. And so the first question is like it's really broad, but how do you make income?
Yeah. So for me, my start was on Upwork, and
Mhm.
I'm gonna guess many people listening to this are interested in freelancing are familiar with it. It's essentially a marketplace similar to LinkedIn where people come and they say, "This is what I'm looking for," and people can apply, or they can
Mm.
just find your profile and hire you. Um, and that's how I initially made income was hourly type of work on
Mhm.
Upwork. I do this thing, I log my hours, they pay me the end. And that transitioned to okay, I've been working with this person and they know someone else who wants to hire me. Well, this time I'm going to charge them $5 more an hour or that kind of
Mhm.
thing. So, I guess that is how I started.
Mhm.
And now it's actually been a while since I've done anything on Upwork because so many people, not so many people, I'm not drowning in work, but
It's all right.
enough
It's getting
people
there.
reach out on LinkedIn, on my website, on Twitter that uh, I just, build client contracts that way
Yes.
where there's not really like a third party involved, if you will.
Gotcha.
So,
So are you more of a monthly retainer, project by project? Are you still charging hourly or based off performance?
yeah, so I started out hourly, and I think that's
Hmm.
how many people start out because you think, like, this is something I'm not doing full time necessarily, right? I don't know
Right.
how you
Right.
go about it, but what I found is clients like to know how much they will be billed.
Right.
At least some of the clients I work with, like, they want to know I'm going to get an invoice for 3 grand at the end of the
Right.
month.
Hmm.
And what I found is I got a lot faster at doing the work. And so I wanted to charge like a monthly retainer as well because I could do all of these things for them, in 50 hours a month instead of 100 hours a month. So I'm giving them the same results, but
Yep.
I'm doing it faster. So why would I charge hourly? Um, Anyway, so that's how I currently package my services. Like my minimum is 2,500 on any retainer per month,
Hmm.
and um, I take up to 4 clients at a time. So not every client is 2,500, but
Hmm.
I think that's just what I've found is a threshold for like all the admin stuff you have to do as well. Like it becomes worth
Right.
it for me. Billing
Right.
the client, everything, emailing them, getting slacks. It becomes worth it for me at 2,500. So that's like my minimum. Um, and uh, what I like to do is so you said like project based retainer versus like monthly retainer.
Hmm.
A lot of media planning or like agencies will be like, hey, if you spend, $100,000 a month, like we'll take 10% of that or whatever. I'm
Hmm.
flat rate. And a lot of companies
Yes.
love that. They don't want, like, what if they have to take their budgets down? What if you're doing a great job and they have to take their budgets up? Like, they don't want to be punished for spending more on
Right.
ads.
Right.
So I'm always flat rate. Like, I'm not taking a percentage of how much you're spending on your ads. And I'm doing like project based retainers, if you will. So it's like hey, I'll manage this specific channel of your ads, and I'll swap the creatives out twice a month, and I'll give you this reporting, and I'll get on a call with you twice a month or whatever, but I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
bill you monthly. So it's like a mix of
Yes.
monthly and project based.
I love it. Going back real quick to the hourly, just a word of caution, and I'm sure Jill can also recommend this. Make sure you're kind of accounting for all the benefits you're bringing that individual. So it's like, let's say at a company, you can typically charge, or your like hourly rate is like $30, but you're full time. You need to be doing significantly more per hour because you're also doing, like Jill said, the admin work. You're also accounting for all the time that you have to put into marketing or all your expertise. So if you're not quite there at the retainer or even percentage spend level, it's not unheard of, and it's actually recommended to do like 80 to $150 per hour because you're providing so much value to that company. Because their other option is to either hire a big agency which has huge retainers and those percentage spend contracts and big long contracts, or hire somebody full time, and that is a huge overhead that they have to take on.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get that out there because it's so incredibly important to break away from like what you are possibly making full time, right?
Yeah. And I've heard the hard and fast rule is take your hourly rate and double it.
Mm-hmm. If
Like
that,
if you're
or
salaried.
triple. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because, I mean, even companies might have to pay for your health insurance. They're
Yes.
paying their side of FICA. If you're self employed, you're paying, like, you're essentially go from paying 7% federal
Mm-hmm. To
taxes
15.
to
Yep.
14. Yeah, 14,
Yeah,
15.
or 15. Yep.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think at least double is great advice.
Yeah, at least. Yep. Yep. Don't undersell yourself, and don't go the discount route too much.
Yeah.
When you're starting out, do what you need to, but just be careful. Okay, awesome. So then this is a really big question, and I think this is probably the biggest hurdle. I think a lot of people are incredibly skilled, and they already probably have the skills. They just need to refine maybe like their onboarding process or just their personal brand, but they struggle to market or find people that need their services. So, how do you market yourself? You mentioned Upwork and maybe Fiverr. I don't know if you mentioned that, but the marketplaces where people are actively looking for essentially freelancers or contract work. But maybe outside of that, how do you market yourself?
Yeah, great question. I think the key to marketing yourself, and really, if that's on Upwork, if that's on LinkedIn, is
Mhm.
picking a niche or like picking one category. Because I have people that talk to me and they're like, well, my current job, I do HubSpot and I do Klaviyo and I do
Mhm.
Canva and I
Mhm.
do this and I write and I do SEO and I do Google Ads. And I'm like, well, no one wants to hire, I think, a freelancer who does that. That's like a rare hire to me. And that's really
Right.
someone who should be like a full time employee in my mind. I think someone wants to be like, oh, Connor, he does Meta and Google Ads. Like,
Yeah.
he does those things. Like, Jill, she
Mhm.
does programmatic ads. Like, the
Mhm.
end. So I think that is a really big way you can market yourself is just by niching down.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I think for me, like Twitter's been a pretty big thing,
Mm.
but you have to be so consistent there. So I don't love like building a social media presence
Mhm.
personally, and I think the exception to that is LinkedIn. I find that like every time I make a good solid LinkedIn post, I'm getting someone in my inbox
Yep.
that's like, hey, I want to ask you about this. And it leads to a good conversation. Like I think that's how we got connected. Like I either saw your stuff, you saw
Mhm.
mine, kind of
No, that's
thing.
absolutely right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think just picking that one thing, like picking that niche is huge. And I don't think just
Totally.
because you list yourself as like a Klaviyo expert, that doesn't mean you have to do Klaviyo for the rest of your life.
Mhm.
You can always pivot, but I think it's really important to market yourself as like one specific expert to begin with.
Totally. I mean, imagine if you were to come across a profile and they say digital marketing expert freelancer.
Yeah, it's
It's
like,
like, oh,
what?
what does that
What are you
mean?
doing?
So you've got to advertise yourself within like five, six, maybe seven words or a sentence of exactly why somebody should hire you. And that's typically because you're an absolute expert in something they directly need. Like they
Yeah.
need just that service. And so, absolutely great, great advice. How about for you personally? Has in person events or in person, yeah, just events, I guess, or lunches or one on ones, has that been helpful or have you found success there?
Um, yes and no. I remember buying my own ticket to Silicon Slopes.
Yeah.
Uh,
Did you go?
Not this year.
Okay.
Well, yeah, so I've done that, and then I've also done some trade shows here and there because everyone comes to Vegas, right? So there's
Mm-hmm.
like a big programmatic conference. And mentioned I used to do a lot of private aviation clients. So I went one time to like meet up with a client at one of these events. And then I kind of walked around and was just like, should I pitch people here?
Mm-hmm.
I found that in person is so good for like the networking, like the making friends of it, if you will. But
Yes.
it's you don't typically talk to the decision maker who would hire you like at an in-person event, is what I found.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm.
I've stopped going to a lot of those.
Yeah. Yeah.
But part of that is just because I have, a decent amount of inbound, so I don't necessarily need to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I do love going, like just for the sense of like camaraderie and like you make friends in person and you grab dinner, you learn about
Yeah.
this new company. So
If I can just add to that, I think there's always going to be like events that are within your industry. Like you said, the programmatic event, which I'm like, that's probably cool to go to, but you're just talking with other programmatic individuals, right? So it's like,
right.
if I, yeah, if I could recommend, I would step out of your comfort zone and go to big, very generic events. Silicon Slopes is actually a good one. I found some success there. If you're here in Utah, like Commerce Catalyst events, Tacos Together, I know I'm missing so many, but that way you're not just talking with somebody that's possibly your direct competitor. You're talking with somebody that, although they may not be the decision maker, they oftentimes know somebody that may need your help. So that person of a
Yes.
person or a friend of a friend, that network can grow and be incredibly valuable. It's hard to track the value, but yeah, I just want to throw that out there because that's kind of how I got my start. And then LinkedIn and networking there was kind of like this slow snowball effect that was able to build up. But yeah.
Right. And it's like, okay, now I know Connor. In
Hmm.
5 months from now, someone's going to be like, do you do Google Ads? And now I, send a client your way. So I think it's just okay, I know you now, though. I've had a conversation with you. That's kind of nice about in person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In person, or, a lot of you get a post and you post and that's amazing. You get all these views and likes. But what really matters is the messaging in the background or behind the curtains, where it's like, man, I just had a conversation with this person in their direct message, and I don't know, you just connect with them, and then, like you said, I'm gonna run into somebody that needs Jill's services, and because we're not direct competitors, absolutely. Like I had a good 40-50 minute conversation. You're an absolute expert. I will 100% refer you. So yeah, it's
Totally.
just so fun.
Totally. Yeah. And even the people
Uh,
who are competitors, I found that sometimes I'll be talking to someone who's like, we're spending $1 million a week. And I'm like, that is you.
do you need help?
Not that I wouldn't do that, right? But I'm just like,
Yeah.
oh, actually, I think this person who's like a little more online than me would be better.
Hmm.
So I think,
Absolutely.
it can be beneficial, right? To even connect with competition.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you should, even if it's in the mindset of a friend that I can reach out and ask for help, because I have a lot of amazing freelance freelance friends that do Google Ads, Meta Ads, and you help each other in so many ways. Okay, I want to keep going just because there's so many awesome questions. But one that I think, a question I want to ask you, and I think it holds a lot of people back, is that they see freelancing as risky. Like a full time job on the surface is like, oh, like I'm stable, right? And we kind of are learning that that's not really the case with all these layoffs and tech layoffs and stuff. So, regardless, I think people see freelancing as risky. So, like, how do you mitigate that risk as a freelancer?
I would say my analogy I like to tell people is that, when you're working one full time job, like that is all your eggs in one basket,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're
Totally.
freelancing, like for me, let's say I have 4 clients at a time, um, suddenly that becomes one of the clients wants to end the contract. Uh, okay, I can pick up one more. I'm not completely laid off. I think the other piece to it is um, you can no, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Like, if your salary is 75K, that
Mm-hmm.
is the salary you'll make, like the end. But you could have a month freelancing where you do like 20K. So
Yep.
I think obviously you could have a month where you do zero, but I
Yeah. Yeah.
remember one summer I had like all but one of my clients, and I had like six at the time. Were just like, hey, we want to not run ads for the summer. We're going to end the contract. Like we'll maybe pick things back up like in the fall and the winter. And I just
Mm-hmm.
remember sitting at my kitchen table like, what am I doing? This is
Scary.
this is scary. Like this is almost the
Mm-hmm.
equivalent of getting laid off. But then I was like, wait, no, I have one client still, and also last month was like so killer that
Mm-hmm.
I think it's I think it's like a mindset shift of like, okay, I'm not having this salary all the time, but I'm having, this, I shouldn't make like hand gestures on the podcast, right? But
We'll
it's
leave it
not this like
visual. I got
flatline
you.
salary. It can be
Yeah.
like really great months and a mediocre month and a really great month and a mediocre month. And then
Mm-hmm.
as long as you're being like pretty cognizant about like saving and maybe having an emergency fund, you can totally make it work
I love
financially.
that. Totally. So, kind of to summarize, diversify by having multiple clients. In a lot of ways, you're actually possibly safer than a full time employee, depending on what industry and what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's say you get, quote unquote, I'm doing hand gestures as well, but let's say you get laid off by one of your clients, you also still have other clients that will, I mean, even if that's not quite enough, it can float you for a couple months. And then looking at the big picture month by month, it is kind of like a higher risk but higher reward, possibly. And so capitalize on those higher income months and don't just go spend that and don't go buy a really expensive car because you're like, oh, I'm making 20K this forever, every month
Yeah.
now. Don't go do that because there are going to be months where it's going to dip down, but on average it's actually, statistically, if you look at it like the trend, it's probably going to be better than any salary position. And then
Mm-hmm.
you hit this perfect, but like have an emergency fund. For my wife and I, we set a specific amount that we had to have saved in addition to removing ourselves from any bad credit before her and I went full time. And so now she's full time doing content creation. And so before we even dared do that, we had to agree on a figure that we felt like, hey, this, we feel safe. Was it mathematically like accurate? Not really. It was just like, we're like, that kind of like our gut feeling, in
Yeah.
our gut we feel safe about this.
And
Well,
I think the
fantastic.
thing that maybe not everyone enjoys this, but for me, now I have a very hands on opportunity to like pick the exact health insurance I want from the marketplace. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't come and go. Like it's always there, regardless of like if I
Yep.
get laid off or not. Same thing with like having, a solo 401k if you choose to go that route, or having like a Roth
Mm-hmm.
IRA. Like there's so many things that, yeah, like suddenly you don't have dental insurance or whatever. And that might
Mm-hmm.
be a con to some people. At the same time, you now have like this freedom to choose, you know,
Yeah,
what
what fits
computer
your
you want. Like you
lifestyle.
don't have to use a Windows computer now. You can use a Mac because it's just like
Hmm.
all on you. And I really do like that part of it.
Yeah, you are totally independent in a lot of good ways and maybe some scary ways. But if you think about it, you're like, even those scary ways where it's like, wow, my company doesn't give me insurance. Wow, my company doesn't match a 401k. That's okay because likelihood of it is you're going to make more. And so you can cover that. But you can also pick and choose what like actually makes sense rather than whatever your company provides.
And I do like I always say that, but then I always caveat it with like an emergency fund is just smart if you have a
Hmm.
full time job or not. Like you could get
Oh,
laid
for sure.
off from like laid off or like end contracts with either. So
Yeah. Well, I have one more question and then I'm going to just tell the listeners how to get a hold of you. And then I want you to hit on your YouTube channel because I think it provides so much value. The final question, and this kind of ties into this how to mitigate risk, but and this actually may be even more um, personable to you because you're about to go on maternity leave. But if you had to restart, meaning you lost all your clients, what would you do? Because I think a lot of people think it's like, hey, if I can't get this to work, or 3 months work and then everything comes crashing down, like what's the worst case scenario? And I kind of want to hear your thoughts on that.
yeah, if I had to restart, I would actually pick a different skill or field.
Oh, nice. Okay, I love that.
And the interesting thing is, I've thought about it on and off throughout the years. I've had an interest in UX. Like I started initially
Hmm.
in college with graphic design. So that would actually be my route. Like I would probably just take, like, let's say, like you said, all my clients are gone, or in fact, I'm currently wrapped up
Hmm.
with all my clients, just headed into this maternity leave. But I've thought about
Yeah.
that, like, oh, maybe I'll just take a couple online courses about one specific field and ask someone if I can shadow them
Hmm.
and switch. So I don't know what that would be because it's not that I like hate media planning. I like media planning, but
Hmm.
it's just I would want to see other things. Like I want to get into HubSpot. I want to get into Chat GPT and making art
Hmm.
with AI. Like I
Yep.
get interested in other fields, and so I feel like if I had to restart, I would honestly get on Upwork. I would get on Google Trends. I would see what people are hiring for,
Hmm.
freelance or not, and I would learn that thing. So,
I love that. Nobody's answered it quite like that. Most of the interviewees will answer like, well, I've built up all these amazing skills so I could, pretty quickly grab new clients, or I could go get a
mm,
full-time job with all these skills that I've learned. And by, freelancing the last 2, 3 years, I've actually learned way more than had I been at a full-time job. So I can easily translate that into getting a full-time job. You're so free spirited. You're like, you know what? I think I would just try something else. I love
yeah, I mean,
that.
maybe that's like a, I don't know if I would say privileged answer because I've been doing this, I've been freelancing full time. Well, full time.
Hmm.
I've been freelancing as my only source of income for over 4 years.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
just feel like the, if you have kind of an abundance mindset, not to get too like woo woo with you, like if you're like, I will get hired again. If you have that
Hmm.
mindset and you're learning new things or you're keeping up on the skill you offer, I just feel like clients will come.
Absolutely. That is such a good way to put that. So let me tell and make sure I'm correct on this. Let me tell the listener how to get a hold of you. On
Mhm.
LinkedIn, it's just Jill Parkinson, Parkinson. So that would be linkedin.com/in/, Jill Parkinson. You also have a website, jillparkinson.com, and Jill is Jill, just in case. But is there any other way that you'd like to be plugged or be contacted by?
Yeah, interesting that you asked that. So I had a client, just quickly, I had a client that hired me without even talking to me. She just clicked
Mm,
hire
yep.
on Upwork. I didn't even know you could do that. This
Uh-huh.
was January 2020. And she was my age. She was really cool. We did great work together. Her boss was super pleased about. Um, anyway, I told her, like, why don't you freelance? Like,
Mm,
you seem like the right fit for it. Anyway, she ended up freelancing. She killed it. She was making way more than I was when we had these conversations. I was like, wow, maybe my calling in life is like to teach other people to do this. You
yes.
know, not that I really taught her anything. I just encouraged her to jump off the cliff into the water, if you will, like if we're continuing
Hmm.
that analogy.
Oh yeah, I love it.
Um, so she and I had a conversation about a year and a half ago to make a course about freelancing. Um,
Hmm.
and what we learned is that we don't like to run ads to our own products. um, and we
Hmm.
don't like to make organic content on social. So, what we ended up with is a great course about freelancing and some great content, like a big Excel spreadsheet with like all the marketplaces you can be hired as a freelancer and talking about LLCs and when to make an LLC. I think we have some great content on there. But we
Hmm.
actually ended up transitioning the course over to YouTube
Yep.
because I don't know if you've heard of Cody Sanchez. Um,
Not off the top of my head. No.
okay, yeah. So she's a influencer in like the business buying space, like business acquisition. And um, this friend that I built this only freelance course with
Hmm.
ended up getting a job offer from Cody, who she kind of like idolized. And so she ended up taking this full time offer. I ended up getting pregnant. And so we just decided to like, we don't have the time to manage and like run everything that it takes to do this course. So we've just moved it to YouTube. But
Gotcha.
yeah, if anyone wants to check that out, it's youtube.com/at, like the at sign only
Hmm.
freelance. Um, and like I said, still great content, but I think we both ultimately decided we like freelancing more than we like talking to people about freelancing because it does take like that, like it takes that motivated person to like actually get their first client, and you kind of can't do that for someone. So
Yeah, you can't hold their hand the whole
yeah,
time. But what's
yeah.
ironic is you are now currently talking about freelance on a podcast.
Right? It's like I still love talking about it. I still love
Love it.
teaching, about it. And
Hmm.
I actually had a girl like intern for me who she has been freelancing for years full time. Like
Hmm.
I truly do love the style of work. I just decided like, oh, I don't like promoting my own stuff like all the time. And you know this, but like let's say I
Hmm.
promote my $200 course. Sometimes it costs 150 to get the sale, like an
Oh
ad
yeah.
spend. And we're just like,
Hmm.
oh, we can charge so much more just actually freelancing ourselves. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's kind of
Was
something I wrapped up, but it's still on YouTube. I guess I should say.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, hating to plug yourself and sell yourself, everybody subscribe, hit that notification bell. If you have any questions or comments, reach out on LinkedIn. Jill, thank you so much. I've learned actually so much about even just programmatic and the media planner space, and I hope we can find a project to work on in the future.
Yeah,
It,
absolutely.
yeah, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Connor. We'll see ya.